Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is an old friend of mine, Morgan Laughlin, who is the Managing Director, Japan Country Head for PGIM. Morgan, how long have you been in Japan now?
So I first came to Japan in October of 1989.
Wow, okay.
But I was here from 89 to 94. And then moved to Thailand. I was in Thailand about almost 5 years, Singapore a couple of years, Hong Kong for 8 years, and then came back here in 2008.
Okay. So why did you come to Japan in the first place?
I was so I was a Latin American Studies major in college. And I was actually, when I came out of university, I tried to get a job in Latin America. But that was just after the Latin American debt crisis. So I was actually offered one job, but the firm that offered me the job knew that I had offers from other firms in other areas. And they said, if I were you, I'd take that job in M&A or I'd take that job in leveraged buyouts that you're offered with these other firms, because right now in Latin America there's not going to be a lot going on, and you won't do much for your next couple of years of your career, even though we'd be happy to have you, right?
At least they were honest with you, which was good.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is good.
I started off in the United States doing leveraged buyouts, worked in leveraged buyouts, high yield, for about 3 years, coming up on 3 years, when I said I want to do something international. And the opportunities were sent to London for a few weeks and then pulled back. They ended up closing down half that office, and I actually went in to quit. I told my boss I'm quitting. I had an offer from another firm. And he said, well, hang on a second. You want to do international, right? He says, yeah. He says, well, Steve Wertheimer, down the hall, he's going to Tokyo in about a month, and he needs an associate. So if you go talk to him and he likes you, then you can go to Tokyo. And I said, Tokyo, sounds kind of cool. So I went down the hall.
This is during the bubble. This is during the boom. Japan's going crazy in the late 80s, right?
Exactly. I was kind of interested to know how Japan was going to take over the world. Right? That was certainly the time in the late 80s where the view was that Japan had the secret sauce that was going to allow it to effectively end up dominating the world on a long-term basis. So I, on a lark, came over in October of '89. In January, they had me back in New York and said, well, what do you think? And I was like, oh, I mean, if you promote me and and pay me a good bonus, I guess I'll stay. But in fact, I loved it. I mean, I thought that, first of all, you come to Japan this time of year. It's beautiful.
Blue skies.
Blue skies, beautiful.
Crisp.
Lovely time of year. And I didn't realize, I'm from Seattle, and one of the reasons I left Seattle is because I hated the rain. And what I didn't realize is that I got here after the rainy season, and about half the year in Tokyo is actually just as bad as Seattle from a rain perspective. But I was suckered by that. But anyway, so I was told, yeah, okay, fine, stay for a year. So I stayed for a year. The end of that year, they decided to shut down the business here. They said, here's some money, go back to business school. And I said, well, actually, I want to stay in Japan. So the guy who'd sent me over here, I reached out to him and I said, you have any jobs for me? So he said, yeah, I probably could hire you. Worked here that time I was doing aircraft finance, Japanese leverage leases. I don't know if that rings a bell with you, but it's tax-based finance. And I was doing that up until 94. And in 93, end of 93, I was kind of coming up on my expat period and was thinking I want to go back to business school. And started doing my business school applications and was actually looking at maybe even going and joining the Navy at that point. I was thinking about various things, and the head of the region at that point, kind of Tim Rattray, said, hey, Morgan, you always said you want to do emerging Asia, you want to go to emerging markets. I said, yeah. He goes, you still interested? I said, well, I'm kind of going back to business school. He said, well, I got something for you. Look good on your business school applications. He said, you can either go be the head of corporate finance in Indonesia, or you can be the country head of Thailand, because we're opening a new branch and I need somebody there in 3 months. And you can only be there a year. You only have to be there a year, hire your replacement, and it'll be great in your business school app, so you can then go back to business school. So, head of Thailand, that sounds interesting.
Country head, yeah, Thailand sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
So I was 29 years old, about to turn 30, and I headed down to Thailand in February of 1994.
Right.
Yeah. And that 1 year turned into almost 4.5, Asian financial crisis. So I was sort of in the middle of the Asian financial crisis. I was actually the Hong Kong handover in July of 1997, and took an early flight back to Bangkok, still hungover from sort of 5 days of nonstop partying, and landed, got into my car. At that time, back then we used to have the brick phone, car phone,
Yeah.
the big Motorola thing.
Yep.
Got in the car, drivers take me back to the office, and I pick up the phone, I call one of my clients. And I was somewhere, Kuncharat, CFO of a company called Advance Agro. We were trying to do high yield bond for issuance for them. So I called him up and said, "Oh, Kuncharat, how are you? I just got back from the Hong Kong handover." He goes, "Morgan, this is a terrible day for my country, but a wonderful day for Advance Agro." I'm like, "Kuncharat, what are you talking about?" He goes, "What, you don't know? The bot broke last night." I'm like, "What? Bot broke?" He goes, "Yeah, it's like we're at like whatever it was, 25 something at this point, 26. I'm like, "Kuncharat, I gotta go." And that was the beginning of probably the most educational 2 years of my life that I ever had. It was amazing time. It was terrible. I mean, again, tragedy all around you, but you're a young person, you're not vested in it, and you're sitting there sort of as an involved observer, learning incredible life lessons. So when global financial crisis came around, I kind of felt like, I've seen this movie before.
You've seen this one before, yeah. I've been in this movie before. So you eventually got back to Japan after that was back to Hong Kong, or was?
So from there, I went to Singapore. So essentially, I spent the Asian financial crisis doing restructuring work. Well, restructuring our own exposures, because we went from having about 150 million of derivative exposures in the balance sheet to having $1 billion because of the way that when the bot blew out, our credit exposures blew with them. And because we used to do credit approvals based on 2 standard deviations from the mean, the bot went through 2 standard deviations in the first 2 weeks, and so it just kept going. It went from 24 and change up to 50 something, 52 or something at the top. And so we had this huge exposure which we had to work through with our own clients, and then I had a number of our own balance sheet, and then I had a number of clients who were suffering at a corporate level for similar reasons. They'd borrowed dollars and were exposed. And so I spent worked for about 3 years with the Central Group as one of my main clients, working with them as a restructuring their businesses down there. And then at the end of that, I was asked to go to Singapore to head up a corporate finance team that would be covering consumer products and retailing. Actually, I'm surprised I can still remember all this. And consumer products and retailing. And I got to Singapore, and not long after I arrived, so I went through a process of integrating. I was one of the kind of 2 MDs on the integration committee, and there were about 4. We went through this process of integrating corporate finance in Singapore. And I fully expected to get fired at the end of it. I was like, okay, this is what happens when you're on the receiving end. You kind of go through and you show everybody how it all works, and they say, oh, thank you very much, you can leave now. But to my surprise, actually, I didn't get shown the door. I was actually asked if I wanted to start what's called we used to call the real estate investment bank for the combined entities for non-Japan Asia. So that was 1999, and that was again still the Asian financial crisis had the impact of that was still rolling through. As you know, a lot of places called it not the World Bank crisis, but the IMF crisis, because IMF kind of came in and told everybody you've got to restructure everything and take all this pain and sell all these loans, which is of course a great opportunity for private equity. So that was where that was the formation of the large real estate fund management businesses that are in existence today. Whether it was back then, it was Morgan Stanley, Goldman, Bankers Trust, Deutsche Bank, Lehman, Lone Star, all kind of got their start in Asia Pacific on the back of that global financial crisis and buying NPLs, non-performing loan assets. So I was living in Singapore at the time, and essentially was quasi-living though. My family's in Singapore. I was living in Korea as we were buying NPLs and building a business there. So we went from nobody on the ground, about 50 people in the course of a year to build a team to do non-performing loans. So another kind of important learning period. Starting, that was the first opportunity I had to really build large operating teams.
And then, was it then Hong Kong, then Japan, or?
And then, so after the merger, they chose to move all the corporate finance from Singapore, where it had historically been resident, to Hong Kong. So I moved to Hong Kong in middle of 2000. Stayed there until 2006, and we were opportunistic investors. We were promising to deliver 18% kind of returns to the investors. And the market at that time was, in a way, similar to what we're seeing and we have seen in the real estate markets leading up to where we are today. A lot of cap rate compression, a lot of real high valuations for things, and it became harder and harder to actually find deals that made sense. And came along and said, hey, look, we're looking to build a business in the region, primarily senior lending, but back then in Basel I days, you could also do mezzanine lending for the same capital charges as secured lending, like senior lending. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting. I said, do you have a fund management business? And they said, not really, or a real estate fund manager. I said, well, not really. I said, can I have that too? And they go, I guess so. So I thought, okay, that's great. I've got this model now where I can go out and I can lend senior and do a little bit of mezz in the edge. And when the market breaks, I'll turn that senior into equity, and then I'll put it into a fund, and I can spin it out, and I've kind of have this whole sort of vertically aligned business model. Which worked great for up until the time my horse died. And so in 2008, I'd been in Hong Kong now from 2000 to 2008. 2008, seeing things starting to kind of come unwound. I don't want to be fired in Hong Kong paying an extraordinary amount of money per month for an apartment. And at that time, I'd bought some land here. I was starting to build a house. And so
You bought land here? Well, that's interesting. You've sort of been mainly, Thailand, Singapore, Hong Kong, Korea, not much in Japan, but you actually had the foresight to buy something here.
Well, one of the honestly, I've obviously skipped over a lot of my life, which is not so exciting. But I actually first piece of land I bought in Japan was in Minakami, Guma, in 1996 when my first son was born, because I figured I wanted someplace that my kids could have some stability around. So that was my first acquisition here, and I still own that house. I'll be going up there on Wednesday for the Christmas holidays. But I knew that I wanted to be back in Japan. My wife's Japanese. My kids are Japanese, carry Japanese and U.S. passports. And the one thing about Japan, and I absolutely love this country, and I love the culture, and it's been very good to me. But I'm never going to be Japanese. And my kids, I felt that if they wanted, when they turned 18 or 21 or 25 or 40 or whenever it was, they kind of had their coming of who am I. If they said, I want to be Japanese, I didn't want to be in a situation where their dad put them in a situation where they couldn't be Japanese because they wouldn't have spent enough time in the country to have gotten their language skills, to have understood the culture properly, to be able to be kind of accepted within Japanese society. So I was very keen to get my family back here while my kids were still young enough to be able to kind of be completely acculturated. So that's why I bought the land, was starting to build.
Okay. So you get back here in, what year was it?
2008.
2008, after Lehman, right?
We've seen Lehman crashes, or Lehman crisis, global financial crisis, whatever you want to call it, has begun, and we were heavily exposed. We had issues on our own balance sheet. We were trying to merge them together. So what I ended up doing was merging here. The decision was taken in early 2009 to shut down the real estate business outside of the UK. Again, I thought I was going to get fired. Fortunately or unfortunately, I didn't, and I was asked instead to run all the non-trading banking businesses in Japan and restructure our business, which I did for about 18 months. Probably the toughest 18 months of my career, probably the least enjoyable. Again, learned a lot, but not very enjoyable because it was restructure and fire people, restructure again and fire people, and restructure again and fire people, let people go. So that it's just it was not a pleasant time. Tough time. And so after about 18 months of that, I asked to be fired. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. It was no longer fun. One of my guy that I've known a long time, a friend of mine, we'd hired him in to become country manager. So it was kind of somebody who could run the business, and I just asked to be shot. It was harder than I thought. Turned the original deal that I'd cut to be let go in October, had to get postponed and restructured and all the rest. So it took me about 6 months from the time I asked to leave to the time I actually got out of that situation. And then in 2013, in March, at that time Prudential, we didn't have the PGIM brand at that point, called me and asked me whether I was interested in coming over to join them.
So, your first experience really of leading in Japan, I guess, is when you came back to do the restructuring. Because when you first came here, you were probably an operator, you probably had, your own things to do, rather than leading teams, I guess, or no?
No, I had a small team here. So I was, so my first team leadership was between 1991 and 94 when I left.
Okay,
we
so
built a small team, had
right.
about 4 or 5 people on the team, most of whom were older than me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because you'd just come, basically fresh from the States and hadn't had probably a lot of leadership experience there either, I guess, I'm guessing.
No.
So what was the things that struck you as being difficult about leading in Japan or different?
When I was running a very small team like that, it's sort of your player coach, so player manager, however you want to phrase it. So I actually found that relatively easy, because you're just one of the team and you're able to kind of course correct and intervene and have an impact on a very regular basis because you see immediately when something's not working quite the way you think it should. And so it's very easy to very quickly, become involved and help a solution. And the team that I was working with, the team that I had, was quite international, of high level of English. So there weren't really any I didn't have much of communication problems. Now, in hindsight, I'm sure that I had more cultural communication problems than I realized at the time. When you're young like that and you're just full of confidence and things are generally working and you're probably just a little bit oblivious to some of the things that are going on around you because you're kind of just you're moving forward. It's working. Yeah, and it's working, and so so in hindsight, I'm sure it wasn't quite as smooth as I thought it was, but it all worked. And again, when you're in a small team like that, it's relatively easy. What's more challenging in Japan, I think, is when you're running a larger team. You're more removed from it. You're not able to see. You're not involved in all the conversations, so you're not as quickly able to identify where there's a problem.
And I guess too, the second time you came back, you're actually, as you say, you're downsizing. So, that must have been unbelievably challenging in terms of keeping people motivated, not losing talent. As you say, structure fire, restructure fire, restructure fire. That's a diabolical snowball that's rolling down the mountain to crash into you. So how did you go about keeping the whole thing together? I mean, people must have been going through tremendous trauma with that sort of situation because you think you're the survivor, but then you're not the survivor, you're gone. And then the ones who are left the second time and think they're the survivor and they're gone too. So the fourth lucky group is like, how long is this going to last?
Nobody believes it. I think the problem, and that was exactly what I was going through, and probably what really caused me to say I don't want to be here anymore, was because you agree to a plan, you execute on a plan, you get through that pain, you've talked to the individuals who are leaving. There's a clear reason for it. You're downsizing the business. Nobody feels good about it, but everybody gets it. It's like, okay, we understand. We merged 2 companies together. It's inevitable. It's not personal. You've got to make decisions. Done. And I would say that first downsizing, that restructuring, from however many years ago that was now, I remember it being not easy, but reasonably smooth. And I kind of walked away from that feeling like, okay, I'm good to go.
We've done that.
We've done that.
We can move forward.
And then you sit down with your team and you say, this is the team and we're going forward and here's our new business plan. It's all great. And I know that was awful, but it's not going to happen. You know, we're over that and we're moving forward.
We're good.
And then literally, 2 or 3 months later, you get that email that says, we need you to cut 10% of your team and, or whatever, I think like 10, 15% of the time. And so you kind of go through it. Now it's even harder because now you're selecting from the team that, the A team that you've said, this is the team that's going forward. Now you got to choose, okay, which one of those are you now going to tap on the shoulder and take out? So the decision process as a manager, first of all, is much more challenging. And two, the message giving is much more challenging.
And also talented people have options. So, part of the problem there is they actually can, ones you want to keep, can leave and get a job reasonably simply. And so you always have that balance, don't you, of actually trying to keep everyone together and not lose the highly talented people who might think, well, the ship is going down, I'm jumping off. How did that work?
Well, most of that happened, the challenges I had with that were right in the beginning when the merger was announced, not yet happened. That's when the best people tend to get picked off, right? That's when the headhunters or other companies come in, they're like, hey, we see what's happening, and we pulled. And also that was relatively early in the crisis, so there are still firms that were like, oh, we're okay, we're gonna, we'll survive this, we're gonna hire, we're hiring. So we lost a couple of people in that first process. By the time we got to the second and the third restructuring, honestly, people's options had narrowed. So from that perspective, I was lucky as a manager in that there weren't that many other options out there for people. But you're correct in saying that, and one of the things that kind of always made me not feel as crummy about some of those decisions I had to make was almost all the people, I would say all, but there's always an exception probably to the rule, ended up in really good roles with someplace else. Some places, better roles than they had with me, right? So you kind of feel like, it worked out.
It worked out.
But yeah, so that's a tough one. That's a tough one when you've kind of you've created a team. You've tried to create a level of commitment from everybody, and my commitment to them, their commitment to the business plan, and then you kind of come back and sorry, just kidding. And that's where your credibility, your personal credibility starts suffering, and your ability then to get them motivated the second time or the third time is really challenged.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. And when did things start to, from a leadership position, when did things start to settle down for you, where you weren't going through this massive bloodletting all the time and you actually have a real leadership role going forward, something more positive? When did that sort of kick in?
Well, so I would say even in the midst of that bloodletting or that restructuring process, you're having to lead, and in fact, you're doing two jobs at once. You're leading and you're restructuring, and because you've got a business to run at the same time that you're restructuring a business. So during the course of that, I'm still meeting with clients. I'm still meeting with, I'm going out on calls with salespeople. I'm having all sort of discussions around how are we going to, HR not only about the people who are leaving, but what about the programs we're going to do going forward and merging the two, benefits programs and all sorts of stuff. So you never really, I don't. It's hard to differentiate the two. They're kind of going forward at once. You finally finish kind of that bloodletting, but you've already begun this process of managing. And there were these gaps. I don't remember in hindsight now exactly what the kind of gaps were, but let's call them 6 months, roughly 4 to 6 months periods of time where I was kind of left alone to drive the business before that next call or that email came to say, we're going to have to do some more reduction. And those were, I remember the first window was good. That first window of merging everybody together and starting to go forward. We had a plan and we were executing on it, and I felt good. Second one, tougher. And then that third one, I'm like, I'm not going to do this more.
So going beyond that, when you sort of got into a situation where you're able to work in an organisation which is a bit more stable, you're not going through that sort of trauma of having to get rid of people, you're actually running a normal business. And thinking back to your broad experience, when did you discover, there's some things I can do here to engage people, or things you found work better to get the teams engaged than other things? What things occurred to you that were good?
So I think I would describe myself, and I think anybody who's probably worked with me for any length of time would describe me as very much a hands-on manager, very personal in my management. Business for me is personal. I mean, in the positive connotation, not the negative connotation. I think it's, in other words, I don't hold grudges necessarily, but I do feel that the people who work for me, they're individuals and they're people first, and it's huge to. Their job's really important to them. It's important to their families. I feel very vested, okay, in responsible, very responsible. But and with that as kind of a backdrop, I also then try to engage very personally with people, because I think we all know that every individual is different and no individual is perfect. So the role of a manager, in my mind, is to figure out where people's strengths and weaknesses are, and then build a team of other people who have hopefully symbiotic strengths and weaknesses, or offsetting strengths and weaknesses. And so to me, that always kind of requires getting to know people quite well, which means, do a lot of, in the older days, we used to do a lot of company events, a lot of going out and having drinks and having dinners and lunches. With junior talent, particularly, pre-COVID, I would have, even this organization, I'd have lunch with analysts and associates on a regular basis. Because I like to get to know the people that are working for me, and I want them to feel open to be able to come to me and talk to me about things. I have a little saying, which I don't know how well it translates, or I'm sure other people have similar concepts in little different words. But I always say to people, I said, if you're just agreeing with me, you're worthless to me. So if you're disagreeing with me, you just agree with me, you're worthless to me.
If you just agree with me, you're useless to me.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Because again, if people don't question me, they don't express their views, which are if they are contrary minded, they're contrary, then I'm no better than myself. I can't be better than what I know. And the point of a team is you're stronger because there's multiple minds addressing a problem. And so for people who report to me, I desperately want them to let me know when they think I'm wrong, and to engage in that discussion, because through that discussion, I firmly believe better decisions are going to be made.
It's hard though, isn't it, when you're in a boss-subordinate relationship, to disagree with your boss and have job security, or your natural radar says, okay, there's a warning flashing lights going off here, be careful what you're going to say, or be careful how you'd agree, or be very, very conservative in your approach. So how do you actually get people to be authentic and actually really share what they're thinking with you?
A part of it goes back to letting people feel comfortable with you, making feel comfortable with you, spending time with them in an environment which is not a direct, sort of typical reporting line discussion. Being vulnerable, from the standpoint that I'm quite open in discussing concerns that I have or things where I don't know the answer with teams. Or sometimes I will use that as a way in which I may have a fairly strong view about what I want to do, but I'll try to turn it into more of a question to the team, like, I'm not sure what we should do here. Let's talk about it. So instead of voicing my position first, I will always try to let other people speak first. So because, as you say, whether it's conscious or subconscious, people will tend to veer toward in the direction that they think that the boss wants to go.
Safety.
Right. So again, it's a combination of tools, tricks, approach, starting first and foremost with demonstrating your willingness to accept criticism, demonstrating your openness to hear different views, and then it's again structuring questions in that way, not saying this is what I think we should do. What do you think? It's like, well, what do you think we should do, and then coming to a conclusion after the fact, right?
And what about if you've got people who are engaged, then they care about building a better mousetrap. They actually care. So then you can get ideas coming, you can get creativity coming. Anything you've found works well to get people's creativity to the surface?
I think, again, open discussion and dialogue, and sort of to some extent leading the way. The things about, I'll take a little bit of I'll veer off to the right a little bit, come back to your answer, your question. So I think one of the things is, having managed teams in Australia and China, Taiwan and mainland China and Hong Kong and Korea and Japan, every market, every culture requires a bit of a different management approach, and a lot of them are sort of kind of almost generalizations or you can kind of come up with kind of rules around that, but I'm not going to go that direction, kind of overly simplifying it. But there's notable differences that you see as when you're sitting across the whole region about how teams react, how individuals react, how cultures react to things. And specific to Japan, one of the things that we all love about this country, one of the things I love about this country, is the way everything works so well. Drivers drive in their lanes, trains come on time, packages are delivered and they're redelivered, and if it's supposed to be frozen, it's frozen. If it's things work. And probably one of those trite examples that I really struck me when I first came to Japan was people wait for the walk light, even if there's no car within 100 meters. And it could be a driveway, but if it's got a stoplight on it, a walk light, they'll wait for it to turn green. And I remember when I first got here, when I was 25 years old or whatever, I thought this was the most ridiculous thing in the world. It's like, this is a waste of my time standing here for this light. I came from New York City. It's like where nobody looks at the lights. They just look for traffic and dodge between the cars. So I think it's ridiculous. Waste. Silly. This is silly. So I would just kind of walk whenever I could, and you kind of get those looks, and I'm like, whatever. I mean, I'm so much smarter because I'm not wasting my time waiting for this light. Over time, I've actually gone the other direction. And now I'm one of those people who waits for the light. In fact, I even will try and stop some foreigners who are trying to cross. I'm like, no, wait. Because to me, it's symbolically, it's important. Because it's a symbolism around following the rules which makes this country work.
And we're all following the rules together.
We all follow the rules together. We subordinate our own, short-term benefits for the greater long-term societal benefit, right? And that's a phenomenal, fantastic thing about Japan, and it's such a fundamental component of its success, and the reason why it's so great to live here. It's that balance, though, of following the rules and not breaking out and going your own way, with the need in business to actually rapidly evolve, come up with new answers, come up with new solutions as a business evolves, and you get thrown new challenges. And so I think one of the challenges for Japan and being a manager in Japan and for being a professional in Japan is, how do you take that that mindset of I'm going to follow the rules, I'm going to do what I'm told, and marry that to sometimes you kind of got to break things in order to get to the right situation. And I think that's a challenge that Japan has been faced with for as long as I've been manager here, and it's one which I think will continue to be a challenge moving forward. But as so it becomes a kind of, I think that's sort of why I have a job in a way, because I become an enabler to some degree, because as you see an individual or a team starting to bog down with a situation because maybe there's not a rule book that says here's how we approach this specific issue, and so there's no path to follow. Japanese will tend to slow down and start kind of circling, right? And because there's just a fundamental desire not to what the combination of training, combination of education, and also even if they know the right way forward, to break that new ground, you kind of got to get everybody else to agree that we're going to break the rules to do this. We're going to go a different route. And so I think as a manager, a foreign manager in Japan, a lot of that is identifying when that's happening and enabling, saying, hey, let's, you know, give me 3 ideas of how we solve the problem, and we got to come up with a new way to do this. Let's move it forward, and giving authority, giving comfort that we can move down that new direction, and that's something that's quite easy for an American to do, because we always break the rules to some extent, right? I mean, it's normal for us to sort of like, that doesn't make sense. Why? If that's their way, right? Within limits, hopefully. We're not going to regulatory things here, but the point is so it's a natural kind of, again, a cultural thing, and so you marry that together, that kind of mindset with an understanding of the way in which the team you're working with is being challenged from their own perspective. I think that's where you end up adding a lot of value. They may very well know the answer, but they're just not quite sure how to or have the confidence to affect the answer.
Also, the whole innovation process is messy. And as you and I both know, this is a no mistake, no defect society. And so there's a bit of a contradiction between having, you know, Kaizen, which is these microscopic little improvements, but having leaps, and then risk attached to the leaps, and possibly things don't quite work out. Like, you know, minimum viable product here is almost a no-no, because it's got to be perfect, you know. So how have you found encouraging people to take those risks in the innovation process, to actually try things which may not work? And then how are things that fail treated? How are mistakes treated? What have you found works well with that?
So, you know, we have a it's not unique to us, but tone at the top is something which is used, thrown around a lot in Prudential. Tone at the top. You know, people do what they see their leaders do, and whether that's from how you spend the company's money on dinners and drinks, you know, to how you work and the way in which you approach issues, and the way you manage people, right? The way you treat other people. And I'm a huge believer in that. I think you can't ask anybody to do something you don't do. And so I think it starts with showing people the way you make decisions. And that means, you know, in a group environment, let's work through how do we come to the answer. And I may go into that meeting with a pretty good idea about what the answer is, but I want to work through a process to get everybody to understand, okay, this is how we come to the answer, right? And also, again, to your point, be consistent, not punishing people for making mistakes. I think if somebody is made a real effort to do something new, and it goes wrong, the last thing you want to do is to punish them for that. You want to, you know, figure out why it went wrong and get us back on the course, but provide support and, you know, praise, because I can't think of another word, but for having taken the risk.
Recognize them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What about culture? What about building a culture? Because you have a sort of macro culture at the headquarter level of organisations, and then the further away you get from headquarters, the culture starts to change, and then you get into a different culture like this, which is an ethnic national culture, which has its own take on things, and then you start to have a new form of culture here, and then you're the boss. So you've got your own idea about what sort of culture, what sort of environment you want to have. What have you found works well in building a culture?
That's one where, in some ways, you might get a better answer if you ask people who work for me, because I'm not quite sure. You do it, right? So as I say, I kind of lead from the front, and so but I try to ensure that I don't leave them behind. So you're moving forward, you're checking back, you're moving forward, you're checking back. You're trying to, again, make people understand why you're making decisions and why we're going this direction. Not just say we're going this direction, follow me. It's we're going this direction, here's why we're going this direction. And by the way, if you think we maybe should be going a little more to that direction, let me know, right? It goes back to the whole thing of trying to get people to add their value. And I think that openness, the clarity of how you make a decision, people are going to they're going to adopt it. I think where they're capable of doing it, they're going to adopt that as well, because they recognize, well, this is what what clearly my boss wants to do, and the way he approaches it, and that, again, that transparency. I mean, this is where I'm sure I have blind spots, but my view is that transparency, who doesn't want transparency within their organization or within the decision-making process, right? And I'm sure one of where I've definitely failed at times in my career is not by providing sufficient transparency around decisions, right?
What about if you were going to give some advice to someone who's being sent to Japan or an organization here, what sort of advice would you give them to be successful here?
Patience, but patience not with a negative connotation. In other words, it's not like, oh, you have to be patient because the Japanese are so slow. It's not that. It's you have to be patient to wait to make sure that you actually understand, as an example, what you're being told. So, again, gross generalization around societal norms is that people, avoidance of conflict, avoidance of direct challenge. So very often when somebody's talking to you, you'll be listening to them, you've asked them a question, and they're talking, maybe the way I am sometimes, and you're like, when's he going to get to did you misunderstand my question? Why is he talking about this thing over here, and then he's talking about this thing over here, and now he's talking about this up here? I want to know this. And what I've learned through error is if you don't listen, you may very well cut off the answer that you're waiting for. Japanese will tend to circle around something, and they'll circle around, and they'll get closer, and they'll get closer, and eventually, if you listen long enough, you'll understand what their real position on it is, because they'll provide the whole story to why they want it, what their answer is, because it just giving you the answer, one is, I think, is just sort of culturally not doesn't feel right, and also they want to justify their answer or support their answer before they don't want to give the answer and then tell you why they give it. They want to give you the story and then give you the answer. So it's kind of a reverse of the way I would think about it. I'll say, I want to do this and I want to do it because it's because of all this, we should do that. And if you're not patient, you won't get the answer. And if you think, oh, they didn't understand my question, you cut them off, you may never get the answer, right? So patience is a big part of it. And I think, and also patience in developing relationships, personal and professional relationships is another one. Patience would be the first one. I think it's critical. Other ones, be open. Be open to the way in which Japan does things, because there are a lot of really great things about the way this society functions that are different than the way we do. And if as I said, that my very petty example of waiting for the light to tell you it's time to walk across. May seem kind of silly at first, but when you kind of really think it through and you look at the longer term meaning of that, I have a lot of respect for it.
Yeah, the society sort of comes as a package, doesn't it?
Mm.
And I think when we first get here, we're sort of cherry picking the bits that we like and ignoring the other bits we don't like. Eventually, you live here long enough, you start to realise that package has got to be integral, and we've all got to observe it to make sure it works so we don't lose it. So, and what about language? Should they learn Japanese?
Did I learn Japanese?
No, should the person coming here? Well, I don't know. Did you learn Japanese, and should they learn Japanese?
So my Japanese is, I'm pretty good in taxis, restaurants, and bars. You get me much beyond that, I will struggle. I think, and my excuse for that is because when I first got here, I went here for 1 year, and then it was one more year, and then one more year, and you're like, oh, I'm going back next year. I'll just learn how to, say you're pretty, and I'll have 2 more beers, right? And then you, and then kind of time creeps up on you, and then I moved around Asia. And then came back here and was doing regional jobs. And so, again, different language every week. So that's my excuse. I'm sticking with it, right? But I still take Japanese. So I take Japanese class once a week, continue to evolve it, because I want to get to the point where my kids don't make fun of me in my Japanese.
Well, how are your kids bilingual, I suppose?
They are. My kids are old now. So my youngest is 19. My 2 older boys are working in Japan, and I've also got a stepson who works here as well. So. And their Japanese obviously all far better than mine. So would you learn Japanese? Yes, I think you do today. I think you need to. But it's interesting, I say that, and I'll immediately counter it by saying these may make that poor advice because it takes a lot of time and energy to learn the Japanese. And the question is that the best place to place that energy and time, given how fast technology is moving, to allow us to have this conversation in Hungarian, right, or whatever we want, with simply this device sitting on the table between us. So I say I absolutely wish. I guess it's more of a hindsight thing. I absolutely wish I'd had more foresight that when I got here the first time that I thought, I could be here in 30 years' time, and actually spent the effort to learn Japanese. But today I'm with some hesitancy, I will say, yes, you should learn the language because, again, for the reasons I identified.
And thinking about, we've covered a fair bit of ground here on elements of leadership here. Any other particular thoughts you have on what's important about leading in Japan?
I'm not sure it's specific to Japan, but I think consistency as a leader is really important. People knowing what to expect. I think I'm much better at controlling my emotions in the office than I am at home, right? And that's it's pretty rare that I'll blow up in the office. I would like to say it's rare that I would blow up at home too, but I think I'd have a better track record in the office. And I think to me that's because it is important to be consistent with people and again, it comes back to this whole thing I've been talking about, where it's the environment of people being comfortable to question you, to tell you that they don't agree. And if you're not consistent in the way you react to that, if you're not consistent in your kind of your mood and your body language and other things, then I think people become less comfortable to be open with you. So I don't know. I don't think that's specific to Japan, but maybe it's a bit more important in Japan because people are in some other cultures. People are much more comfortable, having a more confrontational discussion or having a more volatile discussion.
It's also probably predictability because they can pretty well predict each other coming up through the same educational system, same cultural, neuron grooving about how things work here. They can predict how each other, but foreigners can be unpredictable, and sometimes it's a bit hard to know how's this going to go, what the hell are they going to do about this or how are they going to react, So I guess that's where that consistency sort of bridges that gap of that lack of potential predictability to make yourself predictable, I suppose.
That's a very good point. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I think it's a very good point.
What's your definition of leadership?
I guess it's the ability to get people to do what you'd like them to do. I mean, as a very literal, I suppose. But the way it manifests itself is more in the form of, motivation, inspiration, causing people to want to do. That's probably a better way to say it. Causing people to want to do what you would like them to do. Not to do, but to want to do, and therefore then carry forward with it. Because if you can order people to do things, and I could almost be certain that their effectiveness in doing whatever it is you order them to do is going to be less effective than, or the job will be less well done than if it's something they want to do. Yeah. And if they're bought into it. So yeah, I think I'd say leadership is the ability to get people to want to do what you'd like them to do.
Sounds good. Well, Morgan, thank you very much for your insights and your perspectives. You've had a fascinating career here, I must say. But really good to catch up again. So thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.